Good morning. I'm Rebecca Snyder, Executive Director of the Merrill and Delaware DC Press Association, and I am delighted to welcome you to Unlocking Google Sheets. We're very lucky to have Sean Mussenden, who's the data editor for the Howard Center for Investigative Journalism at the University of Maryland, Philip Merrill College of Journalism. That's a lot of words, and Sean lives up to
It's
every
hard to
one of
fit that
them.
on a business card, too.
It really is.
I have two business cards I merged together.
Right, that's when you have the front and back. So Sean was a former Washington correspondent. He's sort of the triple threat. He's lectured, he's been an adjunct, he's led the Capitol News Service, and now is moving on and is the data editor for the Howard Center, which has done some really groundbreaking and wonderful in-depth stories. So we're lucky to have him, and he's going to talk to us about how you can use Google Sheets, which is obviously free, to manipulate data. This is the first part of a kind of mini series about data visualization and data journalism. Our next one will be about visualizing data in about 2 weeks, and then we'll finish up with how to use social media to kind of bring those data stories alive. So Sean, I'll turn it over to you. I'm going to highlight you, and you're on. Thank you.
All right, excellent. So yeah, before we get started, I'm just going to drop my email in here, and just a plug. In addition to teaching here and doing journalism with the Howard Center, which is a nonprofit that does investigative stories in collaboration with students and professional partners, I do a lot of work like helping journalists at different news organizations who are working on data stories, or are interested in adding some data analysis to their story or getting a back check on things. I'm happy to do that for you or reporters in your newsroom, free. It's just something I do because it's fun and I like helping local news. So if you're stuck in a story or want to bounce off ideas on where to get data or stuck on the best way to approach something, my email's there. Please reach out. Happy to help. Okay, so yeah, as Rebecca said, this is the first of 3 classes, right? So later on, you're going to do a lot of work with visualizing data and using social media to find stories. Today's really about a technique that we like to call interviewing data. It's how to, when you have questions, how to locate data and information that can be analyzed, turning your questions into language that the computer understands. And then developing those results and doing something with it. So for this, we're going to use Google Sheets. It's a great introductory tool for journalism, and you can do a lot of data journalism just with Google Sheets alone. People often will graduate from doing this kind of work into writing data with a programming language like R or Python, which are my primary mediums, but you can do a ton with Google Sheets. So I'm going to show you just a bit. We're just going to scratch the surface here. Let's see, a couple of reminders. Just keep the chat up if you will, or look in the chat when I mention, because I'm going to ask some questions. If you have a question or don't understand something, please stop me immediately. I guarantee you, if you have it, somebody else probably has that same question. The plan for today is, I think I've got about 1 hour and 15 minutes of like instructional material, teaching you some basics of using Sheets. And then we'll have some time where I'm gonna, if you want, where you all can work on some kind of questions of your own, and then we'll come together and see what people have found. It's a good way to lock in what you've learned during the session. So looks like everybody is set up. Okay. So just some quick background here, what we're doing. The world is, there's data everywhere. More data is now collected on people than ever before in human history. Data can take lots of forms. It could be structured data, like a spreadsheet, or unstructured information, things like repository of documents, things that we might eventually turn into data to do some analysis on. Sometimes data is prepackaged for us, and sometimes we have to do a little bit of work to get it. Today, we're going to be working with some census data from the 2020 census. We're going to be working with a sort of a cleaner version that I pulled down from some programs, but for the most part, there's lots of really accessible data on pretty much every beat. So if you cover sports, you've got game stats and data sets of athlete salaries and government subsidies for professional teams. Cover politics, you've got election results and campaign finance data and voter registration data. If you cover crime in courts, there's crime stats, arrest data, data on police shootings, court records. If you cover economics, unemployment data, data on bankruptcies, data on mortgage foreclosure. So pretty much any beat you're on, there's always going to be something that you can work with to augment your reporting. Data sets are sources of information. We as journalists use lots of sources. We use documents, we use video or audio recordings, we talk to people. And just as with human sources, if we find the right person to talk to and ask them the right question, we can get newsworthy information that we can use to put into a news story. We can do the same thing with data, right? We can interview it, and interview is in quotes. We don't yet have systems where you can just look at a spreadsheet and ask it natural language questions and it'll spit out results. I think we're getting pretty close to that. There's some prototypes, they're not great. But for now, really the key essential skill here is figuring out whether our question is something we can answer with data and figuring out how to translate that into a language the computer understands. So really two things I think that are worth talking about when we talk about how data journalism and interviewing data can help us. One, it helps us see patterns. If a lot of reporting is about finding anecdotes or finding individual examples of things, data journalism can bring context to that and help us understand if something we're seeing in the real world is emblematic or fits some larger pattern. So this is a really essential skill for developing really solid enterprise stories. Also helps us find characters, right? So if we found patterns, we often want to find things that are emblematic of those patterns, because that can help us construct a story around. So if we are able to find some general trend, say that the population is growing across the state, but that there are certain counties, say, where population is growing really fast. If there's one that really pops out, we can go there and start looking for things to take us further. Okay, one last point before we actually get to the sort of technical stuff we're going to work on today. This stuff should not be used, the skills I'm going to teach, in isolation, right? It's part of the reporting process. So we come up with questions, we find data to answer those questions, we interview that data set. But on its own, we really need to talk to people to make sense of our findings, put it in context, make sure we did stuff correctly, and make sure we're not overstating it. A lot of my students, when I teach data journalism, have this oh, I hate talking to people. I can just sit in a dark room forever and crunch numbers. And done that way, that's not a great way of doing it. So again, key is part of the reporting process. Okay, so we have two goals today. The first is real. The second is kind of imaginary. The real goal is I'm going to teach you some data journalism basics. We're going to talk about how to use Google Sheets, which is the online version of Excel for people who've never used it. It's a spreadsheet manager program. So we're going to learn how to use that to ask some basic questions, the kind of questions that, regardless of the data set, you may find yourself repeatedly using. Your imaginary goal is this, right? So we're going to be working with a data set of 2020 census numbers and looking back at some 2010 census data. If you're not a reporter for a Merrill news organization for this, I'm going to pretend that you are. The scenario here is the editors ask you to find the most interesting story you can about population growth in the state. between 2010, the last time the decennial census was done, and 2020. And those numbers were they're starting to be released in drips and drabs. So you can go anywhere in the state once you find a newsworthy pattern and a place that exemplifies that pattern, but first we need to find it. So I'm going to share my screen here. And let's just share a portion. Okay, so I assume everybody can see my screen now. Yep. Okay, so just going to show you the kind of the raw data that we're working with that I pulled from the census website. So this is only a slice of the kind of information that has been released by the census. So just as background, I'm sure most of you all knew this, but I'll repeat it for posterity. Every 10 years, the census counts people across the country. They basically attempt to actually make sure there is a person living in the smallest units of geography you can possibly get, really small groups of small geographic areas, in some cases like less than a mile across. And they release that information. It's used as part of the redistricting process. That's one of the main reasons that it's collected. But they also collect additional information, not just on count of population, but also race and people in the household. Eventually, there may be some more complex rolling out, but the stuff that's been released so far is pretty limited. But we're going to be working with that. So I've done a little bit of cleaning and massaging of this data, but I just want to show you what we're looking at here. In a minute, I'm going to share a copy of this so that you all can make a copy and start working alongside it with me. Okay, so just as background for Google Sheets, right? This file is a single Google Sheet. Confusingly, it may contain multiple worksheets. That's what these tabs are on the bottom. So each one of these is a different slice of the data. Worksheet can have one sheet or it can have multiple. So anytime I come to a new data set after I've uploaded it, and I'll show you at the end how you can bring data into Google Sheets, I like to do what's called a four corners check here. This is a good policy to get into. So start literally in the upper left corner, kind of look down to row 25, scroll to the right, get a sense of how many rows and columns it has and what some of these columns are. So first thing to say is it's got 25 rows, okay? One is the header row, and this is the thing that tells us what's in each column. Rows are horizontal, columns are vertical. Why are there 24 rows plus the header? In Maryland, there are 23 counties plus Baltimore City. In this, you'll hear me refer to Baltimore City as a county, just as shorthand, but it's different. So each row here is a county and then some features of that county. So each county is a physical place. It's a thing that exists in the real world. And then each column is some features of it. Its name, its state. I made this little column on Eastern Shore, Western Shore. The total population in 2010, the white population in 2010, the black population in 2010, so forth. We've also got some numbers for 2020. We're going to use that to do some comparisons. Okay, so question for you. There's a column here called Ammer-Ind 2010. If everybody can just go to the chat for me real quick and type in what Ammer-Ind means. What does that represent? So drop in the chat for me. What does Ammer-Ind 2010 mean? Probably American Indian. Good guess. Good guess. Anybody else got a guess? Native American / Alaskan. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen again here. Okay, who said Native American Alaskan? George, why did you say that? If you want to unmute.
I have worked with some census data before, and I know that native doesn't apply just to what we consider American Indians, Native American Indians, but the Inuit and other peoples of Alaska.
Yep. Yeah, that's exactly right. So I've got this other page called data notes here, this tab. And this is what's called a data dictionary. So what is a data dictionary? A data dictionary is an appendix to a lot of data sets that you'll see. And it's explaining in some more detail what each column means typically, and some assumptions that are made. So Amerindian, I've shorthanded. It's not just what people who would define themselves as American Indians, but also Alaskan Natives, right? NHPI, Native Hawaiian and other Pacific Islander. Okay. White, even that seemed obvious, right? It's the white population. Well, if we actually look at the data dictionary, we see what it actually is the white alone population. What does white alone mean? It's people who define themselves only as white and not some other race. There are separate categories, other, for people who define themselves as some other race alone. And then two or more, people who might define themselves as both white and black, or black and Asian. Okay, so always find a data dictionary for data you're working with. If you can't find one, call the people who created the data and ask them if they can help you understand precisely what columns means and any caveats, because if you make assumptions, it could potentially lead to corrections. So, okay. So, I like to scan when I'm doing my four corners check to see if there's any kind of flaws, like, are there any missing values? This is a 0, but it's not empty or a null value. It doesn't look like there's any like text in any of these numbers, things that might affect analysis. If there's only 20 rows, but I know there's 24 columns in Maryland, what's missing? It's always good to do that kind of basic check before you start. Okay, so I am going to stop sharing, and in the chat, I'm going to put this document. And if everybody can open that up in their own browser, please. And right now you're on view only mode because I'm going to have you make a copy of it. So once you're in the doc, let me know, and then I'm going to start sharing again. So I see one anonymous hamster in there. Should see at least a couple more. All right, there's an anonymous hyena, good. And a chameleon, excellent. Okay. So I'm going to share again here. Okay, so to make a copy, you're just going to go to File, Make a Copy, and just call it Copy of MDDC 2020 Data Bootcamp, or you can name it after yourself, doesn't matter. And once you've done that, you can close down the other one. So if you can get back to the chat, just let me know, please. Actually, there's only a few of us, so let's just do it by sound. So just unmute and let me know when you have made a copy of it for yourself. Everybody made a copy?
Yep, I did.
George and Jordy, are you good?
I think I've got it, yeah.
All right. Okay, so we're going to get to some questions here. So just a sort of a note for how I like to do this. As we answer questions, we're going to follow an I do, and then we do, and you do format. So what that means is I'm just going to show you how to do it the first time. Then I'm going to undo everything that I've done, and you're going to do it with me. And then in some cases, I may ask you to do kind of a related thing on your own as a way of kind of locking it in. Okay, so I've set up some sheets that have just a subset of the data for each question. So the first question, we're going to go to this Q1 total population sheet. And the first question that we have is real basic one. In 2020, what is Maryland's biggest county? Okay, so you'll notice I just asked that question and the computer didn't do anything. We need to operationalize our question, turn it into a format the data understands. It'd be really easy to see this just by arranging the counties so that the county with the biggest population in 2020 is at the top and the other one's at the smallest. This is sorting or arranging. So I'm just going to put my cursor into column E, go up to data, sort sheet, sort by column E. Z to A will give me highest to lowest. A to Z will give me lowest to highest. So we get Montgomery County, biggest county in Maryland, about 1 million population. All right, so I'm going to undo it. Let's go ahead and do that together. So just as a reminder, I'm going to put my cursor in column E. If I put it in column D, when I did it, it would sort by column D. So I'm going to go to data, sort sheet, column E, Z to A. You should get Montgomery County. Okay, so just on your own, tell me what the county with the biggest population was in 2010. That's column D. And when you've got it, drop it in the chat for me, please. So again, what we're looking for here is which county had the biggest population in 2010. And once you've got it, drop it in the chat, please. And if you got any questions or stuck on something or want me to show it again, I'm happy to do that. All right, Montgomery. Okay, so from a story perspective, right, no change in the county that is the largest in Maryland between 2010 and 2020. So just to show that data, sort by column D, Z to A, we got Montgomery at the top. Okay, all right, that one's pretty easy. Okay, our second question, what I'm going to be asking here is which county had the highest percentage of Black residents in 2010? So which county had the highest percentage of Black residents in 2010? So for that, we are going to create a new column. So I'm going to show you how to do that. And then we're going to write a formula to calculate that. So just go ahead and watch me again. I'm going to undo it. We'll do it together. And then I'll ask you to do a similar thing. So which county had the highest percentage of Black residents in 2010? I want to make this, pretty, keep my spreadsheet nice and tidy. So I'm going to want to put this column that contains the results, the percentage or share of total in between column F and G. So if I put my cursor in column G, go to insert column left, blank space. We're going to call this new column %_Black _ 2010. Okay, now we are going to write a formula, also known in other domains as a function. What is a function? It's a specific set of steps that you do to some bit of information. So we take a number, we pass it through our function, follows a specific set of steps, and spits a different number out. So, if you've ever cooked a recipe is a function. You take a bunch of ingredients, you follow this recipe, a very specific set of steps, and then a cooked meal comes out on the outside. All right, so to calculate the share of total, we need to do something pretty basic here, which is to divide the Black population by the total population. And in order to do that, we need to use a system that Google Sheets understands. In this case, we're going to refer to different cells. So just as a refresher, each horizontal line across is a row. Each vertical line down, these are A, B, C, D, are columns. And then where they intersect is a cell. So A1 is GeoID. B2 is Charles County. So if I want to divide the Black population by total population, I'm going to start with an equal sign. All functions start with an equal sign. Google has some sort of smart things. It actually knows like kind of what I'm trying to do here because it's been trained on what lots of people have done with spreadsheets. So I could just hit tab, but I'm going to type it for us. So equals F2 divided by E2. It's also going to suggest autofill. This is just like a automatic fill down. I'm going to just close this out for a second. Okay. So we get 0.4. What is that? That is a percentage. It's just not that pretty. So to make it look a little better, I'm going to come up to the ribbon here and click the Format as Percent button. So in Charles County, the percentage of the population that was Black alone in 2010 is 41%. Okay, so I could type my formula, right? Equals F3 divided by E3. But that's really annoying. It's going to take forever. So I can do what's called filling down. So two ways of doing this. One, I could hover my cursor over the blue bar until it turns into a little plus sign and double click. Or I can click on it, hold, and drag. Okay. All right, so as a refresher, the question was, which one had the highest percentage of Black residents in 2010? So now we're gonna sort the same thing we just did. So I'm gonna put my cursor in column G, data, sort sheet, sort by column G, Z to A, and we get PG County at the top, 64.47%. So, you know, in sort of story terms, you know, nearly 2 out of every 3 residents in PG County in 2010 were Black. Okay, I'm going to undo that. And we're going to do it together. So maybe you've been following on doing it, but I'm going to do it one more time. So insert column left. We're going to call this %_Black_2010. Because I work in a lot of other programming languages, I never put spaces or capital letters in my column names. So that's why you'll see me doing that here. Going to write the formula to calculate the share of total equals F2 divided by E2. Then to make that pretty, I'm going to format it as a percent. I'm going to double click down to fill it. And now I'm going to sort the sheet by column G, insert, data, sort sheet, column G, Z to A. We get PG County as the top. Okay, on your own, I'm going to stop sharing here. I would like you to do the same thing, but for the 2020 Black population. So you're going to create a new column to the right of column I and do that. And when you get the answer for that, please drop that into the chat. Let me know what you're seeing. All right, let's take another minute or so, and then I'm going to call on one of you see what we got. All right. Anybody get it yet?
I got Prince George's again.
Cool. Can we, Isabella, do you mind sharing your screen? Just so we can see how you did it?
Sure.
Hang on, let me,
I
oh,
just did
good,
it
Isabella,
for-
you can. Good.
Yeah, I basically did the same thing as you.
All right. So we've got PG County at 59% and 57. So what jumps out at you here when comparing it to 2010?
The population decreased by quite a bit.
Yeah, so PG, right, is the largest majority, the wealthiest majority Black county in the country. Although there's some question about whether that might be Charles County now, but the share of the population that is Black declined. Same in Baltimore City too, right? So that's potentially interesting. We'll talk in a little bit later, but there may be something, sort of the nature of the data that might be confounding that a little bit. Great, okay. Jordy and George, are you, did you get something similar? All right, excellent. Okay, I'm gonna go on then, and we're going to get to another question. There we go. Okay. So we're going to ask a kind of similar question here, which is what counties saw the biggest percentage point increases in Black residents between 2010 and 2020? Sorry, biggest percentage increase in Black residents. So we're going to be calculating the percent change over time. This is a really handy formula that even people who do really advanced data journalism work are doing this stuff over and over again. So we're going to calculate percent change. Again, I'm going to do it, and then I'll undo it, do it together, and then we'll look at the results. So again, I'm going to insert a new column to the right. And this column, I'm going to call percent change Black 2010, 2020. You'll notice it kind of runs off the screen because the column is not big enough. If I hover over the bar up at the top here on the edge until it turns blue and an arrow appears, I can drag it out to the right. Okay, we're going to write another formula. So what we're looking for here is the percent change from this number, which was the Black population in 2010 and the Black population in 2020. So depending on where you put your last formula, these cell numbers may be a little different, but for me, it's going to be equal sign, starting the formula. So the formula is new minus old divided by old. So in this case, the new value is Black 2020 in column I. I need to put this in parentheses, so this part is done first. So I2 minus old F2 divided by old F2. So new minus old divided by old. Okay. So it's already formatted as a percent for me, but in case it's not for you, click up here. Then I'm going to fill down. Okay. And then lastly, we could sort by column K. So I'm going to undo up to that part before we sort. And if you haven't done it already, let's do it together. So I'm going to insert a column to the right. I'm going to call it percent black change 2010, 2020. Make it bigger. New minus old divided by old equals I2 minus F2, I minus F, new minus old divided by old F2. We get 3.97%. Going to fill down. Again, I'm going to sort by column K. So if we sort highest to lowest, we get Frederick County, right? This pretty large percent change in the number of residents who are Black alone over this period. Some of this could be due to overall population growth. So there's another statistic we're going to calculate to look at that. But we see a pretty big range here, right? So we get 40% for Frederick, 20% loss in Garrett, although really small numbers. PG County number grew at 4%, even though as a share of total, it lost residents. Baltimore City actually lost Black population, 15% lower than previous years. I'm going to show you a fun little trick here. It's called conditional formatting. I do this often when I'm trying to make it easier to kind of spot trends, but we can color code this according to the number of values here. So I'm just going to select column K, go up to format, conditional formatting, and could do a color scale here. So I'm going to change this to like if the number is positive, make it green. If it's kind of right around 0, make it white. And if it's negative, make it red. Going to change the midpoint to a number and hit done. Close this. And now we can see some nice little trends here. I'm going to walk through that one more time, just to undo that for you. So format, conditional formatting, color scale. So apply to range, which column? It's column K. Format rules, what do we want the color scheme to look like? And how do we want to control the colors? So number here, by setting the number at 0, it basically says make the middle point white and then make everything relative to the amount of shading depending on the value, which is why we get high numbers. Oops, I did it backwards. Let's do it the other way. Data survey. There we go. I want the red to white to green. There we go. Okay. All right. So we can see some trends here. Pops out pretty cleanly. You know, Calvert and Dorchester are not exactly 0, but they're right around it. Everything else, big changes. Okay. So yeah, like I was saying, it may be because we might see these big jumps in Frederick because there was pretty big increase overall. Another statistic we can calculate to try and see whether or not there was significant change is just raw change in the percentage points here. So in Frederick, right, if the Black population in 2010 was 8% and now it's 10%, that gets us around the problem of looking at the helps us adjust for the fact that there may have been uneven growth in some of these places. So just another way of looking at this. So, the share of the population that is Black grew by 2%. So to do that, we're just going to do a little more math. So I'm going to insert another column to the right. And we're going to call this column percent point change share Black 2010, 2020. I like to use extremely descriptive column names. Helps obviate the need for a data dictionary sometimes. Okay, so the math is actually even a little simpler on this one. We're just doing some subtraction. So we're going to start with a new value, which is J2 minus G2. I can fill down. And I can sort by column L. And we get Charles County saw pretty huge growth. Charles County is right next to PG, whereas Prince George's and Baltimore both lost as a share of Black alone population. Oh, you notice I had to scroll back and forth here to see Charles County. We can do something called freezing panes to help with that. So the columns stay constant as we scroll down, or the header row stays constant as we scroll. Header row as we scroll down, columns as we scroll to the right or left. So if I go up to freeze one row. So in the help, I just went to freeze, but we can also find it in under view, freeze one row. Also want to freeze up to column C. So if I go to view, freeze up to column C. Now as I scroll across, I can see it sort of easier. All right, so I'm going to undo all those things. And let's do it one more time together. So I'm going to create a column to the right. I'm going to call it percent point change share Black 2010, 2020. Going to write my formula equals J2 minus G2. Going to fill down. All right. On your own, I want you to sort this. And then I'm going to call on one of you to explain the pattern we're seeing here. What jumps out at you from this finding after we sort by column L? What is potentially notable here? Let's see. Jordan, do you want to take a stab here?
Sorry, I was looking at something else. Which one are we looking at here? What do you want to?
Oh, we're looking at the percentage point change of Black share. I could try somebody else if you aren't up on it.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not sure what specific question you want. I had moved on to the Hispanic population one.
Got it. Okay. George, what about you?
You're not going to get anything from me. I'm still totally lost. I'll go back and look at this a little later.
We'll tell you what. Let's take a second and take a look at where it's going wrong. Do you mind sharing your screen? And we'll.
I have no screen to share.
It's getting lost.
Correct. I'm going to be better off just reviewing this at a later time.
All right, gotcha. Isabella, what about you?
Are we looking for the greatest percentage point change share?
Great, either greatest or the biggest loss. Yep. And go ahead and
Would that be Charles
share-
County?
Yeah,
Okay.
share your screen if you can.
Okay. I think it would be Charles County here.
Yep. And what about the smallest? Or the smallest
Probably-
loss, the biggest loss.
Oh, smallest loss, right? Would be St. Mary's.
Sorry, I meant the biggest loss. So at the bottom in
Oh.
Baltimore
Oh,
City.
so
PG.
Baltimore.
Yep. So for those of you who know, and Isabella, are you in Maryland or you're in Maryland?
I'm in DC.
You're in DC. Okay. So PG and Baltimore losing Black population, and Charles County and Baltimore County gaining. What's a hypothesis for what we might be seeing there, or what potentially might be occurring? And anybody can weigh in here.
I'm guessing many people, many Black people are moving from Prince George's in Baltimore to Charles in Baltimore County.
Yeah, that seems possible. Yeah. You know, we couldn't confirm that with this data, but I think that's a pretty reasonable hypothesis that we could test with other kinds of data. The IRS, for example, has a really good migration data set that we could look and see whether we see a pattern like that. Thank you. All right, excellent. Okay, so here's what I would like to do now. I'm going to share again. So we've learned a couple things here. We've learned the calculating the percentage share, the change over time in the total population, and the percentage share in the Black population. You have this Hispanic sheet, and Jordy, I think you moved on to here, right? So I'd like to answer some similar questions and see what people find for this same group. And just a note about Hispanic and the census. The census treats Hispanic as an ethnic group separate from race. So it is possible to be both white and Hispanic in the census's eyes, or Black and not Hispanic. So it's a sort of a distinct thing on its own. So yeah, let's take like 5 minutes or so. And a couple questions I'd like you to answer here are: which counties had the largest and smallest change in the overall Hispanic population? And which counties had the largest and smallest percentage point change in Hispanic population? So what we're looking for here is to look for some trends around growth. So yeah, let's take 5 minutes or so and apply some of these same formulas here, and then I'll we'll call on you to come together. And if you're stuck on something, I'm happy to jump in if you want to share your screen. Certainly, George, I don't want you to get left behind if there's something I can do to help, but it sounds like there's it might be a monitor issue over there. So yeah, let's take 5 minutes, so until 10:30, and go ahead and apply some of these formulas, and let's figure out what we can find about the Hispanic population. And if you got questions, I'm here. Feel free to drop them into the chat, or you can just unmute and ask. So yeah, 5 minutes and we'll come back together. I'm going to stop sharing. Jordy dropped something in. Thank you, Jordy. All right, let's take 2 more minutes and then we'll come back together. Jordy, would you be okay sharing your screen when we restart?
Sure, although I'm cheating, I'm doing it in Excel.
All right. I'll share mine then just to keep on the sheets, but yeah, I mean, Excel is essentially identical to this. Do you have the like online version of Excel, or are you using like the desktop version?
I'm using the desktop version for this.
Yeah.
Just find it a little more convenient.
Yeah, there's all kinds of. I always thought it'd be interesting to do. Well, I think there's a tutorial to be done in like the things that are different between the two, because for Excel users pivoting to sheets, there's always weird quirks. All right, Isabella, how are you? How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm working on the point change share right now.
Point change. Okay, sounds good. Yeah, we'll wait another minute or so until you get some results. And George, you're just following along here. I'm gonna take that as a yes.
Yes, I'm just going to follow along. I've got a monitor issue, and I'll go back through this and work it out myself.
Yeah, it sounds good. And as you watch through, George, if you have questions and stuff, feel free to email me. I'm happy to jump on a Zoom or answer questions.
Great, thanks.
All right. Tell you what, Isabella, once you have a chance to look at, just go ahead and share your screen, and we'll look at yours together.
Okay.
If you're up for it. If you don't want to, I'm happy to share mine.
Yeah, I don't think I'm done yet. You can share
Okay.
yours though.
All right. Tell you what, I'll go ahead and share mine, and then we'll chat about it. Okay. So let me just get the chat up here. Let's try this one more time. Oh, that's weird. Oh, there we go. Okay, so Jordy, why don't you talk us through some trends that you saw?
What I thought was real interesting, of course, I was first looking at it from Frederick because that's where I am. So interested to see Frederick's, fastest growing county, fastest growing Black population, and then second fastest growing Hispanic population, as you see here, highlighted in the green. Washington County leading the way, Frederick second. That was actually not expected. Charles and Baltimore very close behind. Way down in the bottom, I mean, Allegheny and Kent, real interesting to see how small they are. I think I calculated it with by highlighting a difference field rather than doing it all in the formula. And so I think it was 64 people in Allegheny was the difference. So very minor change there.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's one thing that like this, by embedding that in that formula, right, you lose sometimes just the raw change data is useful. So I usually use a diff and a var.
Yep.
And it saves me from having to do the formula.
Having to redo it. Yeah. So like if you just added another column here that just
Yeah.
did this action. Yep. So you were surprised by the Frederick County jump.
Yes, to see it that big. I mean, I know that it's a growing share of the population here, and people are being pushed up from Montgomery County, but it's also not really the most hospitable county. We have a sheriff who's sort of nationally known for his support for the 287G program. Very like sort of like Joe Arpaio and our sheriff here are kind of well known nationally as very anti-immigrant or at least anti-illegal immigration and strict in that. So that was a little surprising to see that the growth continued as much as it has despite that. So
interesting.
Anyway,
okay.
what I saw.
Yeah. There's and let me just say, I mean, we're only working with county level data, but by working with tract level data, of which the data is still pretty good, it'd be possible to identify like specifically like what parts of the county are growing. I mean, if you all haven't done a story on it, then I'd be happy to. Actually, a couple of your reporters I had in my data class like a couple of years ago. So
yeah. Interestingly, I was been one of the reasons I was a little unable to answer your question before is because I was having a back and forth email with our editors because we really haven't done much of this, and it would be good to see. One question I have is whether in the next session the Google Maps has gotten so much easier to use now, and but I've only used it for point data. I've never used it for tract data and area data, and whether that's going to, whether you can do like color coding of the different census tracts within counties and stuff using Google Maps, if that's available.
Yeah, and actually, so you can. It's a little bit more complicated. The thing Adam's going to show is this free tool called Data Wrapper.
Oh, okay.
That will allow you to do that. Or Flourish is another one where you can do it. But I will tell you, I mean, I do know for a fact that like 2 reporters on your staff I had in class, and we were able to produce similar maps in R. So they have those skill sets too.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah. And if they, it's been a while and they kind of forgot it, I'd be happy to give a refresher. Because yeah, there's some really cool stuff you can visualize. I'd be happy to help you all with.
Awesome.
Yep.
Yeah, I haven't done a lot of R, so that'd be great.
So I'm just going to sort by the other column here. So yeah, so PG, right, like had a good size jump, sort of offsetting this should say share Hispanic, and Baltimore City. Yeah, so it seems like even in places where there's been some kind of Black decline, the Hispanic population, there's often been a corresponding jump. The other thing that jumps out to me here too is like Hispanic growth everywhere, right? Even if it's small in some of these places, like we're not seeing any sort of negative trends like we saw before. Okay.
So now you're calculating here percentage point change share Hispanic.
Yep. So expressed as a sentence, right? In 2010, the share of the population in PG County that was Hispanic was 15%.
Oh, you just did it as a percentage point. I did it as 21.24 minus 14.94 over 14.94.
So the percentage change in the percentage
share. Yeah, the increase in share. And so I came up with Washington County and Baltimore County.
Right. So those are smaller starting numbers,
yes,
but a bigger corresponding jump. Yep. That also I think has a lot of value as a statistic. And just to show that, we'll just do that here. So percent.
I was trying to get a sense of which counties did the relative share of a given population increase the most, which would be a different factor, just a different cut.
So equals L2 divided by what was the old G2?
G2.
Yep. So this is the percentage change in percentage point, which can often be harder to express. But yeah, this is really interesting. So I'll just sort by here so we can see what you're looking at here. Percent change and percent share.
Yeah, you got one more row 2 up there.
There we go. Washington County. Yep. Yeah. Right. Like almost doubled. Right. Almost 100% increase. Yep.
So it's interesting conceptually, like how different those two things are, right?
Yep. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So thank you for that. So just I'm gonna go on and show you a really useful thing called pivot tables. But before we get there, um, I want to show you just filtering, which is a way of creating a subset of the data. We'll move somewhat quickly for this because this is kind of a repeat. So maybe a repeat for some of you on the call. So let's say we wanted to modify our question here and say which county on the Eastern Shore had the biggest percent change in Hispanic population. So Washington County's on the Western Shore, Baltimore's on the Western Shore. It's not until we get down here that we see QA. I mean, we kind of look, but with a really big data set, this might be kind of harder. So there's a really useful thing called filtering that I use all the time. So it's creating a subset of the data, hiding certain rows and showing certain rows. So the way I do that is I go to data, create a filter, and it creates these little green arrows. And each of these green arrows lets me control what I see based on some value in that column. So if I just click on the drop down here, I've got a couple things here. So down here, we can see all the possible values in that column. It's either going to be Eastern Shore, it's going to be Western Shore. If I just uncheck Western Shore and hit OK, only shows me the Eastern Shore counties. If I recheck it, hit OK, everything's back. So just one more time how to turn those on. Just go into data, create a filter, check the drop down. So if I just want to see the Eastern Shore counties, uncheck Western Shore. If I want to select all of them again, I can click select all. If I want to turn them all off, I can hit clear and I hit OK. We can also filter by conditions. So not just, unchecking or checking a value. There's lots of different ways we can do that. But one way might be, let's say we wanted to only look at larger counties where the population in 2020 was over 500,000. So I can go over to the total 2020 column. I could manually go through and uncheck all these and check the ones over 500. But I can also do this filter by condition. And I have a lot of options, right? If it's a text column, does it contain a certain word? Does the text start with something? Does it end with something? If it's a date, is it before a certain date or after? It's a number, greater than or less than. So if I want greater than 500,000, I can just check greater than in the value or formula, 500,000. We get all of the large counties. So we could see trends just in the 5 biggest counties, 4 plus Baltimore City. Okay, so that's filtering. I'm going to pause here and we'll just take see if anybody has any questions, and then we'll get to one of my favorite things about Google Sheets, which is what are called pivot tables, where we can take some raw data and summarize it into to extract meaning. So let me pause there just for a minute. Anybody have any questions before we go on to that? All right, let's do some pivot tables. So I'm going to share here again. And I've got a new sheet for us to work in. It's called Q8 Pivot Tables Data. Jordy, for Excel, this is going to be a little different. Have you ever used pivot tables before?
Yeah, I use them every day.
Okay, all right. So this will be a basic repeat for you. I am going to, for those of you who have not used them, this is how you do it in Google Sheets. You may find this kind of useful, Jordy. I actually find that the interface for pivot tables in Sheets to be a bit more intuitive and powerful, but I don't know, you can make up your own mind here. So pivot tables, we take raw data in its more raw form. So each row here represents a county and some features of those county. And what we're going to do is a concept called grouping and summarizing. So we're going to put, say, all of them together and figure out the total population, say, for the entire state of Maryland. Or we can also use other kinds of summary statistics, so averages, or get the minimum value or the maximum value. You know, people often ask, like, when do I need to transition to a programming language to do more advanced data work? And before pivot tables, the answer was pretty much when you want to group and summarize by different categories. Now, I think you can still get pretty far with pivot tables for grouping and summarizing, and it starts to become working with larger data sets, or it's something like working with, or when you have to join data sets that it really becomes too complicated to do in sheets. So to create a pivot table, we are going to go up to insert, and I'll do this and then undo it, and we can do it together. So I'm going to insert a pivot table, and it's going to ask if I want to do it in a new sheet or an existing sheet. In this case, I am going to say new sheet. So we're just going to create a new sheet, and we get the pivot table editor. So just a note on what we're seeing here. On the left side is where the table we are creating is going to exist, right? On the right side is how we control what goes in those tables. So you can see that we have something called rows here, columns, values, and filters. And then we have all the columns from our table. So we've got the GeoID, the county, the state, and the, whether it's on the eastern western shore, and then all of our race values. So let's say we just want to add up the total population for the state of Maryland. So I can click the state column here and just drag it over to rows. You'll notice that now we have this new column here called state. If we had Virginia and Maryland, we'd have 2 rows for Maryland and Virginia. In this case, we just have Maryland. So we're showing what we are summarizing on. In this case, it's the entire data set because everything is Maryland. And then under values is where we want to create our summary statistics. So I'm going to do total population from 2020. And you can see it creates this new column called sum of total 2020. And in 2020, 6.1 million people live in Maryland. Okay. Let's say instead I wanted to figure out how much the average county had in Maryland in 2020. So we want to, add up all of the population values for each county and then take the average. So we could change this drop down here to say average. And now it tells us that the average county has 257,000 people in 2020. Take the median, which is just the midpoint, the middle value. There's 24 counties, so it's going to be the value between 12 and 13, or roughly 12. The median county in Maryland has 108,000 people, so that average is skewed by some very large counties. We can also do the min, right? The smallest county has 19,000 people. The max has 1 million people. That's Montgomery. Okay. You can also do multiple things at once. So, we've got the sum with the total pop. I can drag in total 2020 again. And now I've got, there's the average county. We can keep adding more stuff. So let's do total 2020 again. And here's the min. And here's the max. Okay. So we've made kind of a basic pivot table there. Not very exciting just because it's one row with Maryland, but let's suppose instead our question is, what differences can we look at, what can we detect between the Eastern Shore and the Western Shore? So I've got state here. If I add shore, Now we've got a breakdown by shore. So on the Eastern Shore, total of 456,457 live on the Eastern Shore. The average county is small. It's got 50,000 people. The biggest one is 100K. The smallest is 19. On the Western Shore, we've got, most of the state, right? That's why the Eastern Shore has one congressional district, or did. 5.7 million people. Average county is 380,000. And we get some totals as well. Also turn those totals off. Sorting a pivot table is a little bit different than sorting a sheet, right? Like, so normally we would come up here and do data sort sheet, and things get a little funky when you do that. So in this case, what we want to do is we can control it here. So we want to order it, say, descending. So we want to put the largest total 2020 pop on top, and then sum of total 2020. We get ascending, sum of total 2020, and we get the largest on top. So these are pivot tables. They get a lot more complicated than this. We can also apply filters. So if I just wanted to filter just to see the Eastern Shore values, I could say just Eastern Shore, but it's a way of taking data in its raw form and aggregating it. The reason this is so powerful is that often, like from an agency or something you're covering or something like that, they might give you their own sort of aggregate statistics, and they may, those aggregate statistics may reflect things that they want to tell you, the stories they want to tell you. If you want to be able to ask your own questions, working off of their raw data and summarizing them in some way, it's important to be able to have a process to do that. And that's what this can do. So pivot tables do get more complicated, but this is these are the basics. So, all right, I'm going to stop sharing here, and we can do a couple things. So one is we can end here if people feel like they've gotten enough. We can stick around, and I'm happy to talk to you about story ideas you have, or things you're working on that you maybe want some sort of data guidance on. I'm happy to do that. We can also, you have the raw data there, so you could take a stab at using some of the techniques we've developed here to answer additional questions. Maybe you're interested in Asian population growth, or you want to see how your county compares in some context, or a really interesting thing that I think to look at that we didn't really get into is the 2 or more races category. In particular, there's some sense that that became more frequently used in the census, so may help to explain some of the trends we're seeing around declines in Black population, because there may have been some growth in those other places. So anyway, yeah, up to you. Do I happen to know when the census cuts are coming out next? So they've released what's called the PL file. Those are the redistricting files. And I don't know off the top of my head, but I think I could find that answer very quickly. Jordy, census release schedule 2022. So let's see. I don't know, but I can get you an answer to that. It may take me a little bit.
Oh, that's okay. You can wait after. Maybe I'll shoot you an email after. But while you were doing the pivot, I was also looking at the 2 or more stuff, and that is fascinating, right? I mean, I think I sorted by the greatest variance in the number of people declaring themselves as being 2 or more races or ethnicities, and it ranged from, I mean, the county that saw the smallest percentage increase in that was Somerset with a doubling, 115.6%. And I think I saw that in Carroll County, it was like 320.8%. So basically a
Do you mind
doubling.
sharing, Jordy? Do you mind sharing? I know you're in Excel, but I'd love to see the table you got there.
Oh yeah, sure. Where are we here? Let me go over to share the screen. Which one is it? I guess it's this one right here. Here I can make it a little bigger.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, so Carroll County, you know, threefold increase in the percentage of people, or in the people declaring themselves being a more. This is just straight up. You know, here's the difference: 8,000 more in 2020 than in 2010, and the rate of change in that gross number, and just fascinating, right? I mean, I guess it was Montgomery that had the greatest share of people being of two races or ethnicities back in 2010, with only 38,000, 39,000. That jumped to 120, 200% increase. So, you know, really,
yeah, and you know, I think there was some good education around it, and people were more likely to pick it. But I think we're at a point too, population-wise, where it's just more common, so it's probably reflecting something real. And you can actually get to the extent that you'd be interested in like digging into this more, I'll just show. This is from our studio. This is a list of all the different variables, the things the census collects that are available. So, there's top level stuff, right? Which is total population of one race, and then one race: white, Black, American Indian, Asian, Native Hawaiian, some other race, two or more, population of two races. But you can also get here population of two races, people who are identifying as both white and Black, or white and Asian. And the quality of this are three races: white, Black, American Indian, right? So you can really do some sophisticated like digging into, these are people identifying with 5 races, 6 races. You can look at people who identify as Hispanic or Latino and white, or Hispanic and Latino and Black, or Hispanic and Latino and 2 races. I mean, there's like a ton of pretty interesting stuff just in this summary file that you can pull. And then, what else is in the PL file? Jail stats, group orders, because that's useful for redistricting, vacant houses. And you can get this data all the way down to what's called the block level. So that's a very small collection, usually a couple hundred people. At those small levels, the census did something kind of crazy, and maybe you all got into this in your census section, but they introduced something called differential privacy, in which at low levels, the actual number at some of those micro groups are like a fiction, like not real, because of some concern that there are new machine learning algorithms that can be used to basically de-anonymize census data. But at the county level or the census tract level, you're generally going to be on solider ground there. So
yeah, that's fascinating.
And there'll be additional stuff. So this is what's called the short form, like it's just stuff they need to release right away for use in redistricting. But there'll be some better stuff like income and language and other stuff that'll come out too.
I got to run to something at next meeting, but thank you so much. This has been great.
Thanks. Yeah, and shoot me an email. I'm happy to help or in any way I can. Anybody else have any other questions or trends they want to look at or things they're interested in? If not, we can wrap up. But sounds like no.
It sounds like everyone's processing and maybe a little overwhelmed by the amount of census data available.
Yeah.
That was amazing to see just how you can make sense of all those, you know, how you can get really good actionable information out of, you know, a lot of data. So thank you for doing that for us. I think it's helpful that we recorded it. So for those listening in, you can come back to this presentation at any time to say, what did Sean say? I can't get my data to work the same way. And of course, Sean's email is in the chat for those of you who have follow-up questions.
I'll put it in there one more time.
Going twice. Any other questions? All right. Well, thank you.
No questions, but just
Go ahead,
thanks.
Tom.
Thanks and praise.
Oh, wait, before we shut down the thing, George just sent me a note. Oh, cool. Yeah, George, and if you got questions as you do that, just reach out to me.
Will do. I'll let you know if I have any questions, but I think I should be able to work with that now that I've figured it out. Thanks.
All right, awesome.
Perfect. So Tom, any last words? You sounded like you were going to say something.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Tom.
Well, I was going to say praise and thank you. So I can wrap that up pretty quickly, but this was a fire hose of information, but it was presented in such a way. And I really appreciate the way you walk people through it and then do it together and then they get to do it themselves. I think it was presented in a very teachable way, and your offer to be a pro bono consultant to half of the journalists in the world is incredible. So thank you for your generosity, and thanks for your presentation.
Thanks, y'all. See ya.
All right.
Thank
Have a
you.
good
Thank
one.
you.
Appreciate
All right.
it.
Bye all.